Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December 17th, 2018, running the clock down on the rest of the year. And guess what? Welcome to it. In case you didn't read this morning's Daily Kos Radio is going to be live later at 9 a.m., which is now post. We are in week 100. I hesitate even, you hear me hesitate? I hesitate to say that we've made it that far. I don't know whether we really, it's not an accomplishment or anything. We should probably be ashamed of ourselves that we let it last this long, but hey, who are we? We're just a bunch of dirty effing hippies who happen to be right all the time. And the story is beginning to finally unravel. And not only are we've reached the point in the Trump news lifespan, I guess, where every story I read is yeah, I know already, where you been, I guess. And so that's a little bit frustrating. So we'll have to find our way through that and keep your head down and bulldoze all the way through and be glad that things are catching up, you know, when you read these stories in the mainstream media, the traditional media, and you already know about it. That's essentially a sign that the rest of the country may be finally coming along. And, when we welcome Greg here in a few minutes and round up the stories of the weekend and look ahead to the rest of the week, we'll probably hear a little bit about that. We hear it from time to time about how it takes a while for everybody else who doesn't pay attention to these things the way we do. Or, you know, they're conscientious citizens. They're not paying attention. It's just they don't make this their whole life. They can't afford to. They're out there working and doing the things that the rest of us are supposed to be doing, I guess, while we're obsessing over what's happening on Twitter. And some of us can, of course, do two things at once, but not everybody wants to. Anyway, it's very interesting. And of course, it's also time for those who have been on the cutting edge of this stuff to branch out a little bit and show us a few things that we will still raise our eyebrows at. And we are thankful for them. Plenty happening, as I said this morning. I'm not even looking directly to Trump world per se. There's, of course, all sorts of nonsense out of his Twitter rage machine, but lots of other things happening elsewhere as well, and a lot of it happening, you may find, on the front page of Daily Kos as well. So let's see. We could go to what's in pocket. Things we'll want to talk about today, whether we get to them or not. When I say there's a lot of things happening in terms of traditional media coverage of things that we say, yeah, I know already. There's a lot of reporting in the New York Times, Washington Post, elsewhere, sort of about the size and scope of the Russian interference operation, which, you know, you would think that even those publications would think that we knew that already, but it's a good roundup of who was targeted and how. And in particular, I guess I'm happy to see that they are taking care to single out the targeting of African Americans as well, which is particularly despicable, if you ask me, just because of how cynical the play is. For it will bother a lot of you, I'm sure, to find out that essentially that racists were so invested in manipulating the victims of their racism into believing that they were either somehow champions of theirs or that they were at least steering them away from people who actually might care one way or another. Whether they're the most effective at combating that racism is an open question, and we can debate it, though we don't have time today, or ever, it seems, sometimes, for things like that. But it's really rather amazing. And of course, let's see, a number of other developments as well. Ryan Zinke apparently finally decided he was in too much trouble to stick around too. He's announced his resignation from the Trump administration, in scare quotes. And apparently the big story there is that the Trump folks knew that he was a rotten apple and needed to go a long time ago, and they were pushing to get rid of him, which is amazing, hire the best people, etc. We're up to like 9,000 cabinet resignations already. And but apparently the persuasive argument for the people in the Trump administration who actually thought Zinke was too corrupt to stay was, well, I'd like to stay long enough to have a big Christmas party for myself. And they said, that seems like a reasonable request to make. Why don't you go ahead and do it? So that seems like a fun bunch of information to pick up on. And, lots of other things too. Bad weekend for Ivanka. Jared and Ivanka privately appalled at how bad their weekend was. Of course, thanks to ProPublica and their work exposing once again the seamy underside, and we knew it was going to be there, of the inaugural fund. I think raised flags about that one pretty early on once we discovered that there was nobody at the inauguration and that they were having fewer events than any modern day president had ever had, but had raised twice as much money as the previous record-breaking inaugural haul, was Obama's. People began to wonder, and once I noticed over at the FEC, hey, there's no disclosure requirements at the FEC. You don't have to disclose where any of your disbursements go. You got to report who's contributing. You don't have to report who's getting the money. And I realized, for most presidential candidates, that's, I'm sure there's lots of nonsense that goes on, but that's going to cover your bases. You want to know where the influence is coming from, and that's enough to keep them their version of honest. But the disbursement thing, it was almost like it was designed for Donald Trump to come and steal the money. He knew he was going to be shoveling that money out the back door right into, big bags, probably with dollar signs on them, although he probably drew them backwards, and making off to who knows where, absconding with that money. And as it turns out, it was true, and Ivanka had a big hand in it. So we'll have to rerun the SNL complicity commercial, I guess, during this holiday break. Speaking of SNL, the president set to sue them and possibly raid their offices and throw them into Guantanamo Bay prison. So he's actually raged about Saturday Night Live and how it's probably illegal. He really said that. So, all right, Greg, there's a lot on your plate there. You don't have to deal with every single piece of that. You can pick and choose. But good morning. How are you?
Okay, I think I'll pick and choose. It was a funny thing because I didn't see the SNL cold open that everybody was talking about, but many articles pointed to it. As is often the case on Sunday morning, I went to click on the SNL YouTube cold open to see what happened, and it wouldn't play. There was a error.
Yeah.
Error with this, so you couldn't see it.
Oh.
And my first thought is, I wonder if the lawyers got involved and pulled it until they can figure out what's going on.
I don't know. That's a good question. I guess, who knows? I actually didn't. I don't think I saw the cold open. I saw some of the rest of the show, but it's on TiVo. They can't take that away from me, I think.
Right. So the cold open was basically doing It's a Wonderful Life as if Trump wasn't president.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought.
And it turns out everybody around him was wonderful.
Ah, yes. Okay. Oh, I did see most of that. I thought that was another sketch.
No, that was the main one that he was really upset with.
Okay.
And
it should have been. I was wondering what else
so
there
there's
was.
that, right? CNN posted a very helpful graphic. I have it right here in the pundit roundup, but I'll send it to you via tweet onto Skype so you can see it too. But under investigation are the following 6 entities, and they sound similar.
Entities.
But they also sound familiar.
Okay.
There's the Trump campaign, the Trump transition, the Trump inauguration, the Trump Foundation, the Trump organization, and the Trump administration. They are all under investigation for separate problems.
That's a lot of entities. Right.
So the question on the table is there any Trump entity that isn't under investigation? If so, please email Robert Mueller.
There are.
At I'mGonnaGetYou.com. And, it's just amazing. As I understand it, and it's hard to understand because it's not all public, but something along the lines of this happened. Trump wins. He didn't expect to. Ivanka and Jared look at each other and say, how can we make money off of this? I have an idea. During the inauguration, because we're not president yet.
Right.
During the inauguration, what we'll do is we'll have our friends in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and wherever, give money to Americans, and the Americans will give money to the inauguration because funding overseas is illegal.
Yeah, still got to report that.
But we'll hide that.
Yes.
That's how we'll get a lot of the money. What will we do with the money? Here's an idea. So we have this Trump Hotel, and it's not too far from the White House. Why don't we have a reception there after the inauguration? Now, normally the room probably rents for, I don't know, $8,000 or $9,000. We'll charge $450,000.
That sounds like a good number.
They'll pay it.
Right.
The Trump Hotel gets the money. I know we're not supposed to say the quiet part out loud, but hey, that's us.
Right.
So it's
awesome.
like, why not? We'll just have some spending money to start with. Because, we have to buy a new house and clothes and hire PR people.
Right.
Because we're going to be president, and so these are the things one has to do. We need the money. So let's do it this way. Why not?
Right. If we don't have, I like the we need the money part. If we don't have it, someone else will. So
we can't have that. I mean, elections have consequences. So let's do this and let's just get in on it right away.
Yeah. So they say they price gouged on their own inauguration parties, but it didn't matter because it wasn't their money. Although they probably say it doesn't matter because it wasn't our money. That we don't care about the price gouging.
It wasn't our money, but we paid.
But it is our money. We made it our money, but that was what's going to be interesting is when Rudy Giuliani finally has to defend that. Yeah,
the whole point of running for president is this is not our money, but we want to make it our money.
Right. And
that
Rudy Giuliani can.
The Trump Individual One LLC basically says take everybody else's money and make it mine.
That's the idea. And when they have Rudy on eventually to defend it, he'll say, "What's the crime here? The Saudis meant this money to go into Donald Trump's pocket, and it did. Right. It was a gift. What's the problem?"
Well-heeled people want to spend a lot of money at the Trump Hotel because of its excellent location and its terrific dining facilities.
Yeah, that he happens to have owned it is no big thing. Right. It's fabulous because he owns it. Don't you understand?
If I saw a black person in that hotel, that would be a crime. We'd call the police right away. But this is not a crime.
Yeah. I'm sure that'll eventually be the defense. This is what was intended for the money. I know it looks corrupt, but that corruption is when you take money that was meant for purpose A and give it to purpose B. But when the purpose is to enrich the Trump family and it meets that end, what's the problem?
Right. So some of these appear to be local issues. In other words, the foundation, for example, looks like New York State or even New York City can go there with some of these issues.
That's where
the idea that any of these crime family entities are completely clean is ludicrous. And the whole idea is that because Ivanka specifically intercalated herself into the inauguration arrangements, she's liable. So now you have not just the capos. I mean, you have Eric and Donald Jr. from the foundation, maybe Ivanka too, but Ivanka from the inauguration, and then Jared for all sorts of things, including maybe getting the Middle Eastern money, who knows, and then the capo de capo himself, Donald Trump. I mean, the whole crime family is going to go down. It's just a question of when, how, and what's the vehicle. Is it SDNY? Is it local? Is it Mueller? But, it's so obvious to everybody now that even the New York Times is writing about it.
I am glad to see that. There is another local angle, by the way, on the inauguration. I did read over the weekend that the inaugural fund is incorporated in Virginia, which means that the Virginia Attorney General, the state Attorney General, who's a Democrat, has jurisdiction to investigate, which I think he ought to do. And I'll call him.
Isn't the Virginia one the one that's like the New York is the sovereign district, but for the Virginia one is like the lightning round place?
Oh, the rocket docket. That's the federal district court there. Eastern District of Virginia is the rocket docket. But I don't know he won't want to make a federal case of it, of course, if he's the state AG. So they'll have to take it down to Richmond.
I love that. What are you trying to do? Make a federal case out of it? No, actually, we're not.
I'm trying to avoid that at all costs.
We're trying to avoid
It's
that.
the federal government we're prosecuting.
Yeah.
But okay.
Jack Schaefer has a piece in Politico.
Yes. Okay.
About
I don't know.
I'm speaking in between rings here.
Oh.
About Far From Winding Down.
That's good. You're doing a good job with that.
Mueller's probe feels energized. One more ring.
Okay. Ringy-dingy.
And then it goes into the voice box, except it really doesn't because it's all these solicitations at Christmas that has nothing to do with anything, and they never leave messages.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm sure you all get that. So Jack Schaefer says, week 82, Far From Winding Down, Mueller's probe feels energized.
Oh, 82 of the probe. I forgot because I was just saying today is it's week 100 of the presidency, but 82 of those weeks he's been under investigation by Mueller. That's awesome.
Exactly right.
Wow.
A slew of plea deals, Trump pals turned witnesses, and new investigations seem to defy predictions the special counsel will wrap up soon. And, he just goes over like, who says it was going to wrap up soon?
Yeah. Oh, Giuliani. He said it.
Right. The winding down of the Mueller machine doesn't mean the show might end soon.
No, that's true also.
Right. The much rumored and predicted indictments of Stone and Corsi have yet to be handed down, with both Gates and Cohen still willing to sing. We got a whole chorus here. Mueller might convert some of their warblings into new or expanded charges. We got enough singers to do the fourth movement of Beethoven's Ninth, Ode to Joy. Donald Trump Jr. and their work on the Trump Tower project in Moscow, which we now know is pursued by the Trump Organization until June of 2016, 6 months longer than Cohen had told federal investigators. Mm-hmm. John Dean and Fox News legal analyst Andrew Napolitano have speculated that Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner will be indicted, perhaps in connection with the back-channel work he did with foreign governments during the Trump transition. Mm-hmm. And then there's the mystery witness who has been fighting one of Mueller's grand jury subpoenas under cloak of secrecy in the federal courthouse. Main event or sideshow, nobody knows. I guess Mike Pence doesn't want to talk. The Watergate investigation lasted 4 years. The Iran-Contra investigation went on for more than 6 years. I don't really know it's Pence, but why not? And Whitewater for more than 7. In fact, were Mueller to call it a day before New Year's, as some suggest he will, it will make this one of the shorter probes ever.
Well, you wouldn't know it from all the nonsense and lying going on. By the way, another Giuliani thing. Over the weekend, I love when Giuliani goes on TV and says, listen, Trump might have done more murders than you think, by way of defense. I just want you to know that. He, for some reason, he went on TV and said, oh, yeah, by the way, they might have been working on the Trump Tower Moscow thing all the way to November of 2016.
Maybe.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, while we were talking to Russia.
Noted.
Now, Schaefer also, I like this paragraph here in his piece. Some of the most vocal predictors are Trump supporters who think that by shouting, hurry up, they can coerce Mueller into finishing before he's truly done. Some of the journalists filing predictions are responding to the demands of editors who love to print extrapolative what-if stories.
Yeah.
Right? We saw that what if Trump wasn't president? That was SNL yesterday. So, as the late New York Times columnist Tom Wicker hinted in his 1978 book On Press, journalists, especially political journalists, rush toward the predictive because what might happen makes a better story on Slow News Week than what actually did happen. Now, we have so much stuff happening, I don't know that matters anymore. He's not talking about Slow News Weeks, he's talking about Slow News Days. I mean, it's gotten to the point where if there's not two big breaking Mueller stories per day, we feel kind of cheated.
Yeah, I always feel like there's now an AM, PM split, right? By the afternoon, the morning stuff is old.
Right. Unfortunately, Jack Schaefer nails me here. Mm-hmm. He says, the great thing about prognostication is if you guess often enough, you might eventually get it right.
Well, that's true. But that's
right? After all of those expired predictions, Washington Post reporter Devlin Barrett appears to come closest. On Friday, he wrote that prosecutors don't ordinarily sentence guilty defendants because they might need them to testify later, and sentencing will give them leverage to continue cooperating. If you cooperate with me, I'll give you a lesser sentence. Well, if I already know what my sentence is, what's the benefit of cooperating? That Mueller's team has arranged quick sentencing for Flynn, Papadopoulos, Michael Cohen, and Manafort indicates he might be approaching his finish line. Only Rick Gates awaits the sentencing machine. On the other hand, I would point out, if Mueller has decided he's not really trying any more of these cases, like let's just say he's making a case for why the crime family should be indicted, but that's not his job. It's going to be, Virginia and New York. Then he doesn't really care whether they're sentenced or not. He doesn't need that kind of leverage. His report or his talking indictments or whatever you want to call them might, cover all that stuff.
Okay.
Now, it's true that he might have more to do, or the big ones might be done, except for what to do with Donald Trump himself. You can finish those. And then again, you also have the whole situation where there's no reason why Trump can't be indicted. We talked about that last week. I mean, it may be that you can't prosecute him, but why not just indict him? Why not just call him an unindicted co-conspirator or say that he's indicted, and then, it's up to the Supreme Court to decide whether you can actually prosecute him.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't see why you don't roll the dice. You can't both indict him and say he's an unindicted co-conspirator.
What are you going to do, fire him?
Yeah, I will.
Well, and even if you did, it's already too late. He's already, indicted. So, and you can't fire the grand jury. You can only fire the prosecutors.
Right. Okay, that's true. Well, I guess, I suppose at some point everything could go out the window. Like you could go in there and I suppose you could send somebody to arrest or roust the grand jury and chuck them out of the premises. I mean, that would be illegal and unconstitutional and all that, but so what? I guess we can get to that.
If it were Mitch McConnell, what you do, I suppose, is turn the lights off and then make them do all their work on the steps.
Yeah. In all likelihood, they would be perfectly willing to do that, but okay.
Mm-hmm. Right. Although if you do it in January, it's kind of cruel.
Yeah.
So there's that. This NBC poll that I was telling you about, and if I didn't tell you about it, I should tell you about it, out over the weekend, released Sunday morning, and has some pretty funky numbers here.
Yeah.
Which I think are worth discussing. Now, this was one of all adults because the election's over, so they're not looking at registered and likely voters.
Okay.
But
nobody's registered anymore anyway.
Right. 62% say that Trump isn't telling the truth in the Russia probe.
That's correct. Good job.
Yeah. I mean, most of the public gets that he's lying.
Okay.
Now, the fascinating thing about this, that was sort of expected, but the one number that jumped out at me, which was really startling, and then we'll look at his real ex. Who do you want to see take the lead in setting policy for the country?
Me? I mean, not me.
You?
I don't want to do it.
No, you were not
asking
on
me.
here. Look,
No one was asking whether they wanted me to do it.
less than 1%.
Oh yeah. Well, that's probably true.
A couple of Boy Scouts. That's about it. So, who do you want to see take the lead in setting policy for the country? You get to pick.
Okay.
What
are my choices here, by the way? I mean, I'm not picking
Trump,
an individual
Republicans
person.
in Congress, Democrats in Congress, not sure.
Okay, I like Democrats.
And yourself is not a choice.
See? All right. But, I'm going to go with Democrats in Congress.
48%. Ding, 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 ding. That's the big number.
Nice.
48% of the
It's
public
like Family
wants
Feud.
Democrats in Congress to set policy, and 12% are not sure.
That's good.
Okay. What about Trump? 19%.
Oh, well, I don't think even Trump voted for himself on that.
What about Republicans in Congress? 21%.
They had a chance.
They lost. So this reflects the will of the public in regard to the election. But I think more importantly, going forward, Democrats are united and Republicans are in disarray. Look at that split.
They are.
90% want Trump to do it and 21% want Republicans to do it in Congress.
True.
That is a completely divided party.
Yeah. And even together, it doesn't equal the number for Democrats.
No, it does not.
What an interesting... And Trump comes in third. I mean, that's
just like his build the wall plan did when they voted on it.
Yeah. Oh, true. Yeah, and he's.
People don't like his policies. That's not why they're voting for him. And when you look at these polls that say, well, he's got 42% approval or whatever, the strong approval is pretty low. The strong disapproval is pretty high. You have partisan politics propping him up. Remember, you can't have really low poll numbers unless your own party abandons you. That's what happened to Jimmy Carter, and of course that's what happened to Nixon at the end. And that's what happened to W at the end, and that's what will happen to Trump at the end, but it takes a while. So there's your takes a while.
I guess so.
Now,
not sure.
What about electing him? 38% of registered voters say they definitely or probably vote for Trump in his re-election.
38.
Yeah. Wow. 52% would definitely or probably vote against him.
Okay.
It's no different from a year ago.
It's not much different from the 2016 election results.
He is not a popular president. He's never been a popular president. You look at these numbers and you realize you really can't win with these numbers unless you cheat.
Yeah, all right. Well, I guess
he cheated.
Cheat.
You know, how do we know he cheated? Because those are those stories you were talking about in terms of Russian misinformation plus the Comey stuff that came right at the end. Yeah. That's how he won. And American political pundits still have not wrapped their heads around the fact that it was a one-off, and that if he ran again, especially if he was not running against Hillary Clinton with the Russian disinformation stuff, and Clinton herself, not the greatest campaigner in the world, ran against anybody else, and he likely loses. Trump.
I guess. I mean, I'd like to think so, although...
Not sure that Bernie wins because you have the whole machine dumping on him. But what I'm saying is that there was I'm not rerunning 2016. I'm saying that was a really unusual circumstance. When you look ahead to 2020, a lot of the elements that helped Trump win are not there. He's unpopular in the Midwest, for example, and there's no Comey.
Yes, that's true. We're one less Comey to have to deal with. Yeah, I don't know. It was definitely a one-off, and there's no reason that he should have won, but for the interference. And then I just figure, I assume they'll just interfere against anybody. Maybe it was easier against Clinton than against somebody else, but I guess we'll find out.
It's easier to deal with.
True. There's that. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7. For which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you. But remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box. And you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with us, having a nice chat during the break about how terrible everybody is. Republicans. 58% of people think they are terrible too.
I want to finish up on this poll because the write-up, I think, has some good messaging here.
Yeah, okay.
Just 10% of respondents say the president has gotten the message for a change in direction from the midterms, when the GOP lost control of the U.S. House of Representatives but kept its majority in the U.S. Senate, and that he's making the necessary adjustments. The dam has not burst on Donald Trump, said Democratic pollster Peter Hart, whose firm conducted the survey with Republican pollster Bill McInturf. But the survey suggests all the structural cracks that exist in the dam.
Okay.
Okay.
Matter of time.
I think, again, and I say this over and over, you brought this up even before the segment started, and you're quite right, that most people don't pay attention to politics. So when Mueller does something, it hits way harder for the general public than it does to us. We shrug our shoulders and say, oh, I knew that. I knew it was coming. I'm so glad it's here. And the general public says, what? He did what?
Yeah.
When? With who? And we just scratch our head and say, you didn't know that? And, of course, you have to restrain yourself from saying things like, oh, you didn't know that, or what took you so long. Yeah. It is just poison when you're trying to either recruit people to your side or trying not to be the super obnoxious old uncle at Christmas dinner.
Yes, that will help. Of course, most of the time when I say that, they're not listening to that either. So
Well, there's that. So that's a little bit protective. Okay. Also in the poll, combined 50% of Americans say the Russia investigation led by Special Counsel Robert Mueller has given them major, fairly major, or just some doubts about Trump's presidency. 44% says it hasn't given them more doubts. But a lot of that 44 isn't, I'll vote for him no matter what. That number's closer to the 20% level. That means a lot of people just haven't heard it. So there's a lot of people who can break off on that.
Okay, break.
Okay, McInturf, the GOP pollster, says 44% without doubts is a powerful reminder about the status of his political base. I say it's a powerful reminder of Sinclair and Fox's ability to avoid talking about actual news. When you get actual news, those minds, some of them will change, half of them. The other half are lost. They're gone forever. We're never talking about them. The evangelicals, the white evangelical non-college base of Donald Trump's presidency support is never going to change. We're not talking about them. It's everybody else. It's white non-college, non-evangelicals. It's the hold your nosers who voted for him. That's why Peter Hart said there's lots of cracks in that base.
Okay. I'll accept it.
All right. Also, not good news for Trump. The public is increasingly pessimistic about the economy. The poll finds the percentage of Americans believing the U.S. economy will get worse in the next 12 months is at its highest point since 2013. 28% say it'll get better, 33% think it'll get worse, and 37% believe it'll stay about the same. In other words, nobody really knows, but they sort of have a feeling about it. And we're talking about politics here. So last January, a year ago, 35% said it would get better, 20% said it would get worse. So the pessimism of the public is evident compared to last year at this time. It's gotten so bad. How bad is it, Johnny? It's gotten so bad.
Okay. Yes, sorry.
that the write-up about the economy might crash, where does it show up? In the New York Times business section? No. In the sports section? It could, but no. It's in the style section.
Oh, well, yeah. Like, you won't
Rich people who don't pay attention to this.
Yeah, I guess that's right. Oh, my goodness. The economy might crash. I
found
found out
word.
over brunch.
Pass me the monocle polisher.
Maybe. Well, all right. You got to reach the crowds where they are, I guess.
A lot of fun being made on that. Why did you put that there? Well, because rich people need to know that things may not be as good as they were a year ago.
Okay. Yes.
So we have that. So that's the background for what's going on. So on the one hand, it is always of interest. It's not surprising because we know this is the case, that basically Trump's support has been a flat line.
Yes, okay.
Kind of like Mike Pence's enthusiasm. And it just doesn't change that much. But within that, there are lots of cracks. And I just think that the actual real Mueller information will be what pushes it over the edge. You just have to wait for that. The economy is not helping him. It didn't help him win the midterms. And it's not going to help him as we move toward 2020. And again, I think the greatest debate is if Trump is that wounded, if he got 6 investigations going against his crime family entities, if the economy is not going to do as well at the end of the year as it is right now for 2019, and if his numbers do crater, then he may not be reelected. In fact, he probably can't be reelected. But the worse it gets for him, does he stay or does he go? Oh. It's just a fascinating debate. The obvious reasons for going is that you bring the entire party down with you. But the reasons for staying are pretty obvious to Democrats. Right? Yeah. First of all, for Trump himself, and his only interest is his own interest, is he gets to avoid a lot of lawsuits if he stays.
Yes, for the time being, as long as he stays. Right.
So you want to run for that second term and win because you hope the statute of limitations runs out on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's your play. There's no other reason for him to want to stay president. He hates the job.
Yes, and he thinks the White House is a dump.
But he keeps him out of jail. From Democrats' point of view, running against somebody that wounded is like a win. See November.
Yeah.
We'll see. So why would Democrats want him out? Why don't they impeach him? but not care about whether or not he's convicted. Let him stay.
Oh, yeah, all right. That's a thing. That's a new way of thinking about it. That's a good idea.
Right? And so Michael Cohen, the good Michael Cohen, the columnist, has a piece in the Boston Globe entitled, "Why Aren't We Talking About Impeachment?" And then lists, some of the things that he's done. Democrats fear that moving forward with impeachment will upset voters who they believe are not interested in investigations of the president. Recent polling, which shows that a majority of Americans are opposed to impeachment, supports this view.
Okay.
But you have to point out they haven't heard what Mueller has to say in his final conclusions, and they are very interested in that. Also, Michael Cohen writes, if the Democratic-led House of Representatives were to impeach Trump, there's very little chance that two-thirds of the Republican-controlled Senate would follow through with the conviction. Why upset Trump's most fervent supporters on something that's basically a lost cause? The answer is rather straightforward. If the president commits impeachable offenses, Congress has a responsibility to hold him accountable for his actions. If it doesn't, it makes a mockery of the rule of law. And again, the whole argument last week that the people like Neil Katyal were making is that the whole idea that you can't indict the president is because you throw it to the Congress to impeach. If they don't impeach, then you should indict.
Yeah.
But he's got to be held accountable one way or the other.
You would think.
Pick your poison.
I pick impeachment. No, you know what? I say indict him. Just go ahead. And
I say indict him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
And let it play out. But let everybody know he did things that are serious enough to indict him.
Yeah. Let it play out. Let's have the fight.
Indicting is less political, by the way.
Yeah, I guess it is.
It's a grand jury that indicts, right? It's a jury of your peers. Trump thinks he has no peers, and therefore they can't be indicted. But the idea is it's not Democrats or Republicans who are doing that; it's American citizens.
Yeah, your peers aren't eligible for grand jury service; they're in prison.
Right. Well, he's peerless, so that's
one way or another.
So I think it's a fascinating discussion, and I think it's the direction in which punditry is headed. Okay. Because more stuff is going to come out. I mean, that's inevitable. You got those 6 entities that are being investigated, and everybody keeps saying, okay, everybody we talked to in the White House say they fear the Michael Cohen information more so than what might come from the Russian investigation. Everybody outside the White House says, yeah, but the Russian investigation is the big enchilada because there's no way to defend if you have actually colluded with a foreign power who happens to be an enemy of the United States. And both are true. We know that the Michael Cohen is devastating because there's already indictments. There's 2 felonies, and Trump, is as close to an unindicted co-conspirator as you can get without naming him as such. And so that's real and concrete, and you have all those people out there who need to see it on paper before they believe it. But the potential for what the other investigations, including colluding with foreign powers, is incredibly devastating, especially to the acting president, Jared Kushner, as well as the titular president, Donald Trump.
Yes, and he's laughing at that already.
Yeah. Oh, he's a titular.
Well, he's a grown man and something. I don't know. Well, yeah. Look, it's going to make it an interesting debate. Whether I wonder whether Mueller's shop internally debates. I imagine they have to just to be thorough, but they. I'm curious, and one day I guess the tell-all book will reveal it. But
sometimes you are guided by what your results are, and when you actually have those results, you can say, out of sorrow rather than anger, I have no choice but to do X.
I guess so.
That's part of it. But the other part of it, and the reason I bring it up, is because if you have the debate about how leaving Trump there is better for Democrats for 2020 election purposes, it's bad for the country. Yes. But there's some political benefit. That takes a lot of the sting out of, I can't discuss impeachment. It'll kill us politically. Actually, you can't because it's good for you politically. And so if that's the case, it opens up a lot of windows to talk about this stuff. And the more you talk about it, the more it becomes an accepted idea. And the more it becomes an accepted idea, the more you actually can go ahead and do it.
That's true. And of course, you have the excuse of saying, well, it's not that I wouldn't remove him if I could. It's just the problem is the Senate belongs to Republicans and they're not going to do their job. I'll do mine.
I know. There's nothing I can do. Here's your 45 articles of impeachment.
I guess. You could always try that. I think I would be.
Well, there's at least 6, right? One for each entity.
Yeah, and that's. I mean, there's plenty more entities where those came from. They just don't. They don't all have Trump in the name necessarily, but the big, interesting, fun ones.
I know, but if I were a company, I wouldn't want to be named Essential LLC right now.
Right, among other things.
Among other things.
Well, all right. A good start for getting the picture of what's happening in the Trump, Russia, Mueller side of the equation, and of course the polling. Do you have a minute or two to discuss the other big news of the weekend, the Friday drop? I guess was it Friday?
It was Friday ruling. of the healthcare nutty Texas judge. Sure, we have that. Okay. I'm going to at the end of the very, 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 very end of the long pundit roundup.
Yes.
Okay. I have 4 stories on that.
Oh. Okay.
And there's a 5th that's worth covering, but let me just give you a flavor of them.
Flavor.
The 2 from the New York Times are interesting because of the authors. Okay. First one, what the lawless Obamacare ruling means. It's not based on a solid legal argument. It's an exercise in raw judicial power.
Ooh, our favorite.
Activist judges.
Yeah.
Guess, was that written by a conservative or a liberal?
Lawless lawless ruling.
What the lawless
Obamacare
ruling means, it's not based on a solid legal argument. It's an exercise in raw judicial power.
I would guess that's a liberal writer.
That's the conservative, Jonathan Adler,
goodness.
Who was an advocate of getting rid of Obamacare altogether. He just says this is such a crappy legal argument, you shouldn't even go there.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The companion piece is the guy who was on the other side of the Obamacare lawsuit. This is the Burwell stuff. Nicholas Bagley. Okay. And it's interesting. This is what the lawless Obamacare ruling means by Jonathan H. Adler and Abby R. Gluck. Ms. Gluck is a professor of law and the faculty director of the Solomon Center for Health Law and Policy at Yale Law School. So Adler and Gluck wrote one piece, and then Nicholas Bagley and Abby Gluck write the other piece.
Okay.
So she's involved in both of them. And Nicholas Bagley is the liberal who was defending the whole Obamacare thing against Adler, who was attacking it. But just like Neil Katyal and George Conway, they might be on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but they see eye to eye when it comes to rule of law. So Nicholas Bagley has a piece, Trump's sabotage of Obamacare is illegal. A president doesn't have the right to dispense with laws he dislikes. So you have to faithfully execute the law. So maybe Armando or an actual lawyer can go into the whole issue of what the Texas judge decided, basically that because there's no individual mandate anymore because Congress struck it down, therefore that's not severable from the whole rest of the law, so the whole law is unconstitutional. That's basically what he said, as I understand it. And the legal people say, well, you can't just say that because you want the result. You know, Congress didn't get rid of the law, so how are you speaking for Congress when you say that they meant to get rid of the law and they did that? Because Congress didn't get rid of the law. They had the opportunity. They did not.
That's true.
So then we have the political aspects of that. This is from the LA Times. Obamacare crusade grows more fraught for GOP after court ruling. President Trump cheered it. But even the Trump administration's head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services rushed to assure Americans that the court ruling does not change anything immediately. And those in need of insurance can still enroll in Obamacare. Legal scholars are deeply skeptical that the legal victory by Republican governors and attorneys general, including Josh Hawley, who beat Claire McCaskill, congratulations, Missouri, you got what you voted for, will stick. The ruling by Fort Worth-based U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor that Obamacare is unconstitutional runs counter to established precedent and takes some bold leaks of logic. Still, healthcare groups warn that the ruling puts in immediate peril coverage for at least 20 million people. Democrats fresh off a midterm election in which House Republicans were pummeled amid voter worries that their healthcare agenda framed the ruling as a consequence of the GOP crusade. And that is how it's going to be looked at. And Democrats will make sure that that's the case. Washington Post, healthcare law ruling puts Republicans on the defensive after campaign promises. Basically, the other guy that promised this would never happen is Donald Trump. He promised to protect your pre-existing conditions, come up with a better law than what was currently there. He's done none of those things. He's screwed his constituents, including the base that loves him so much. And how are they going to pass an alternative to the law with a Democratic House? They couldn't even do it with a Republican House.
True. Yeah, well, he's tweeting this morning that he's attempting to say, well, Democrats will, if they don't work with us, are the ones who are depriving.
And then we'll shut down the government, right?
Yeah, right. That's true too. That'll happen.
But we got to open it up first to shut it down. So the reason that we're not going to shut it down over the wall that I'm not going to get is because I want to shut it down over Obamacare. So I'll just wait.
That's a possibility.
Is that out? I mean, it's ridiculous. But what else has he got left? Because the shutdown is the other thing we haven't talked about, and that's coming in 5 days.
Wouldn't stand in the way of anything. Yeah. Well, true. And so
and the funny thing is, Trump can't win the shutdown
or both
argument. He can't because Republicans have left, especially the ones that lost.
Yes. Right.
Trump said, "No, you have to stay here and pass my $5 billion wall bill," and the ones who lost said, "I'm out of here, buddy.
Yeah.
You figure it out. It's not my problem."
Not certain that they wouldn't have, had they somehow been forced to stay. I'm not sure that they don't vote to shut down anyhow. So,
well, Nancy Pelosi said they didn't have the votes, and Nancy Pelosi is always right about votes. But now it turns out they can't even get a quorum. They can't even get a minion.
Well, they might be able to put that together, but I didn't know whether Nancy was had based it entirely on their attendance, or whether in a full house they still don't have the votes.
Oh, so you want to talk about how many ways she was right? I don't know. By the way, she's going to be the next speaker. I just thought I'd mention that.
Okay, well, you could try and convince us of that, but I know that. Oh yeah, right. I forgot how they do that. Yeah, probably. It looks that way, since everybody who was once insisting that they would oppose her has now changed their minds.
Meanwhile, overseas, always important to mention overseas things, British government to advise citizens not to go on holiday after March 29th because they might not be able to get back.
Oh? Is that...
well, when Brexit happens and you have this hard leave, then all of a sudden Britain is not part of the European Union. And there are no rules because they haven't figured out what to do about it. So there you are in Spain having a jolly old time, and now you can't come back because, you didn't bring your passport because you didn't need one, but now you do.
Yeah, I don't know that people would be upset about that. So fantasy of mine, I'm stuck on vacation, but it doesn't really work like that. But
well, Yasha Monk, who's writing this tweet, British government to advise citizens not to go on holiday,
but March 29th.
Also notes they are potentially bankrupting scores of travel companies.
Oh.
The chaos the Tories are willing to inflict on Britain is truly impressive. And this comes from a Times of London story.
Well, I say, it's my British.
Right. Families will be advised not to book holidays after next March, according to contingency plans being drawn up to prepare for a no-deal Brexit.
Is March 29th the day that Brexit happens with or without any plan somehow?
Why, are you going to make me read the story?
I don't know. Which one is it? I'll read it.
I don't know. You can't. Sorry. The article you were trying to read was free for only a limited time.
Oh, okay. You wouldn't know that newspaper. It's from Canada.
Right. If you would like to read this article or get unlimited access, pay me.
Oh, what is that?
It's a Times of London.
Yeah, they do that, don't they? Okay. Yeah. Well, although it doesn't, I like the headlines, and I read the first paragraph, and then I say, that's great. Good news.
Right.
That's all I get out of them. Okay.
There's the tweet that's from, if anybody actually wants to go look at it.
I will take a look.
That's it for me. I got to go to work, but so do you. So you got another hour's worth of stuff to talk about. There's a lot here.
Yes.
You could talk about this Boston Globe article. Again, this is all in the Pundit Roundup. Marjorie Egan writes, race, not abortion, was the founding issue of the religious right.
Is that in the Globe,
which is an interesting thing. And there's the Weekly Standard and how it disappeared. There's
Yeah,
the hard truths
okay,
of trying to save the rural economy in the New York Times.
Oh, well.
Because we don't write enough about rural economies. Let's
Their
see.
diners are doing great.
Here is one I really liked.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a 50 tweet storm.
Oh, my God.
But wait. There's a reason.
Game theory.
Joseph Cranny has a tweet for every state. Local Journalism 2018 in review. In every corner of the U.S., local reporters went to work every day looking to expose wrongdoing. Think of, for example, the guys at the TV station in Charlottesville who were talking about North Carolina 9 and the work they did.
Charlotte. Yeah, okay. Charlotte.
Charlotte. Sorry.
Not the Ville. But
not the Ville.
Probably some people in Charlottesville doing some good work as well, but not on that.
Charlotte.
So 50 tweets local news, and then every
so he's
corner.
Got a tweet for every state.
And his name is Cranny, so I like that. Does he work with his partner, Bobby Nook, working on everything? So in every corner of the nation, according to Nook and Cranny.
Yeah, Joey Cranny. This one.
Right, okay. Excellent.
Right, I sent you that thread there, but it is.
Like
it's very
USA
good.
Today.
And you can pick a state. Let's because we're on the topic.
Yeah.
Let's go see what they had for Virginia. That's where you live.
Yeah.
Right? It's in alphabetical order, so I got to go all the way to the end.
Oh, boy.
In fact, I got to wait for it to load.
Of course it's alphabetical order. He's from Arkansas. So he puts himself
in Virginia.
Yeah.
Scott M. Darty reported on a federal agency fostering a racially hostile workplace with one supervisor calling black and Hispanic employees monkeys.
Bad.
It was in pilotonline.com.
The pilot. Oh, the Virginian pilot. Okay.
In fact, that was in Norfolk.
Right.
Homeland Security Office.
Oh.
A little south of you, but, still an important area.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, it's important to survey all of this. Sometimes it feels like a stretch when you're trying to find news for some states, but like I said, reminds me of the USA Today news from the states, and they would have to put one for everything, and they're like, in Rhode Island, a snake escaped from the zoo, something. But okay, that's actually rather important.
Yep. Anyway, thought I'd mention all of that.
I got the whole year to pick from. Good.
Okay. With that, I'm gone.
Wait.
I'll see you Wednesday.
No, stay. All right. Very good. We'll see you on Wednesday. Thanks, Greg. Probably already late. Drive safe. Okay.
Happens. Take care.
Yeah, okay. I'll give you a note. They don't accept my notes. It's a unique position to write a note for a doctor, though. So that's good. Please excuse Dr. Dworkin from work. He was, I don't know. What are we going to say? All right. Let's catch up on these things. I'm curious, though. Now that local journalism one has got me curious about what he didn't do. He didn't offer Connecticut. Why not? And here's the answer. So many things happened. This is taking on the flavor of the USA Today thing. Here's the Connecticut one. The Hartford Courant reported small town council members dined on lobster ravioli, filet mignon, and a $49 Kobe beef and foie gras burger while discussing the upcoming year's budget. That doesn't feel to me like the biggest news of the year from Connecticut, but I guess the idea is it's local investigative reporting, and it's important to know that. You want to know. So it's Bloomfield, Connecticut, where this happened. Bloomfield Town Council members dined on ordered pricey dinners while they ran up a $2,500 bill on food during its budget deliberations, and that probably is unwise. And in case you were wondering what else has happened in small towns, in small states, like I made fun of Rhode Island. I'm sorry, I love Rhode Island. In Delaware, here's what's going on there. It just happens to be the next one. Reported at least a half dozen people accused of nonviolent minor crimes, including loitering. That's not the thing. They've been banned from a city as a condition of their release from jail. That is a weird one, and not something. I bet that would fly under the radar for a lot of the time. That's what's most important, I think, about this, and that's why some of these even picayune feeling stories it's important to highlight. And by the way, Florida's big story from local investigative reports. Again, I'm just going down the list here. Maybe I should just read the whole thing. 50 seems like a lot. But Florida gets the big splashy headline for the Miami Herald's work on Jeffrey Epstein, which just took place over the last couple of weeks, or broke over the last couple of weeks. So everyone's aware of it. But yeah, so there's everything from, hey, your hamburger that you ate during the budget deliberations is too expensive, to Jeffrey Epstein, who's a good friend of President Trump's, is a child rapist, and maybe Donald Trump is too, and everybody should know about it. Okay, so there's varying degrees of importance, to be sure, but it does look really kind of fascinating. So I recommend it to you. We can't, we don't want to go through. Oh, some of them we've actually covered. Look at this. I scored all the way to the top. The Alabama story is the one about the sheriff who pocketed the $750,000 slated for inmate food programs and used it to buy himself a beach house. You remember that one? We actually did do that one. So I'm in agreement with Joey Cranny here about the importance of some of these stories. Others will be a surprise to you, I'm sure. Okay. Where do we go? Well, for one thing, we go to break as our 1 minute break at the top of the hour comes up. And afterwards, well, we'll pick a couple directions. We might have to do sort of a lightning round thing to catch up. But I don't want to promise that, because some of these things look like they would be very interesting to read in depth. But it's time to catch up on these things and see, well, if any of it surprises us, I guess. It looks like there are a few twists in the plot available. We'll try and pull some of those out, and then we'll see if we can pick one or two that we want to hit in depth. All right. Phew, let's see. Plenty more to round up, of course. And yeah, one of these days this week we'll have to have Armando in for his reaction to the big healthcare case too, because he had a very interesting one that I know a lot of you saw and would like him to share with us on the air. We'll see if we can persuade him to do that. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see, are you ready to throw it all against the wall and see what sticks? Let's see. Rolling up to the top of the pocket. Let's see. Okay. Before we dive into the important stuff, can I just literally pause for a few seconds just to say I saw the pictures of what Stephen Miller did to his head on the news programs this weekend. I don't know which one he was on. I didn't pay any attention to what he said. I just enjoyed people tweeting around pictures of his spray-on hair, which was pretty amazing, especially if you saw the one that took screenshots of what he looked like from the front versus what he looked like from the back, and the same appearance. It was pretty amazing. I don't know who told him that was a good idea. He's kind of well known as a bald guy, and to spray paint hair on his head just seemed pretty ridiculous. And then, of course, we were admonished, don't pick on appearances. He's got so much horrible stuff you can pick on substance. And yeah, I know. But it's also funny that he spray painted a big black triangle on his head and went on TV and said, I look good. Like when the president paints his face orange and says, I should do this and go, this is how I want to look in public. I find it amazing that this is being done. And honestly, if they were different colors, nobody would have any questions about whether or not they were bananas and should be locked up, right? Donald Trump picks orange to paint his face. And I guess the idea is, well, maybe that's supposed to be a tan skin color, but it isn't. That's not a human color. And nobody blinks about it. But if it were blue, for instance, everyone would say, all right, he's nuts. He's lost his mind. Because what? Because nobody's skin is blue? I guess that's supposed to be the idea. So there's no alternative explanation for why he's painted his face like this. There's no explanation at all for why he paints white circles or pink circles around his eyes and orange around the rest of his face. But I understand the physics of how it happens, but why would you look at that and say, yeah, I'm done? I guess is the big question. And similarly, I don't know. I mean, maybe he didn't have enough paint left. Maybe he thought they wouldn't shoot him from the camera angle from the back. I don't know. But he ends up, Stephen Miller ended up, like I said, painting a big black triangle on his forehead, which had it been orange like Donald Trump or green or blue or purple, people would have said there's something wrong with this guy. Unless, I mean, the other excuse, by the way, is people could be saying, like for Donald Trump, right? Oh, but that's not a skin color, so it can't be spray on tan, right? You could say, well, like maybe he's going to a Bengals game or something like that. Nobody ever offers that excuse, but it's a possibility. And I don't know what the excuse would be for Stephen Miller, but I don't know why people think that's not worth commenting on. It's a sign that you're crazy. Everybody knows you don't have hair. We know that, and it's okay. That's fine. Really, literally nobody cares about that. I mean, people will still say, look at that bald a-hole on TV. I hate him. And people will say, don't pick on his baldness. Well, it was really a comment about his being an a-hole, but okay, fine. Look at that perfectly normal looking a-hole on TV. That really doesn't change very much. Anyway, don't let that worry if you spent some time on it. It was absurd, and you're right to point it out, and I don't think anybody should tell you not to. All right. Big story in circulation this morning. There are a couple of versions of it out there, and we have them all. How about that? We have got the New York Times version. What's their headline here? Russian effort to influence 2016 election targeted African Americans. And the CNN version of it has not got the same focus in the headline here. Russians sought to recruit assets through social media, Senate told. But at the heart of all of this is the Senate's a report prepared for the Senate Intelligence Committee. And ultimately, I guess this is what prompted me to say this is another one of those stories that you say, well, of course, I knew this already. But the rest of the world has to see in print, I guess, in order to feel the effects of it. Let's take a look at the New York Times version of it, because they're more specific in the headline, and I have theirs first. The Russian influence campaign on social media in the 2016 election made an extraordinary effort to target African Americans. And the sentence continues, used an array of tactics to try to suppress turnout among Democratic voters, and unleashed a blizzard of posts on Instagram that rivaled or exceeded its Facebook operations, according to a report produced for the Senate Intelligence Committee. So an important point there. Instagram, not, I don't think, being called out to the extent necessary at this point. By the way, we're reading the work of Scott Shane and Shira Frankel in this piece, datelined today. So hot and fresh right out of the oven for you. More or less, so you've probably already read it. So the report adds new details to the portrait that has emerged over the last 2 years of the energy and imagination of the Russian effort, that's nice, to sway American opinion and divide the country, which the authors said continues to this day. Active and ongoing interference operations remain on several platforms, says the report, produced by New Knowledge, a cybersecurity company based in Austin, Texas, along with researchers at Columbia University and Canfield Research, LLC. One continuing Russian campaign, for instance, seeks to influence opinion on Syria by promoting Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president and a Russian ally in the brutal conflict there. The New Knowledge report, which was obtained by the New York Times in advance of its scheduled release on Monday, is one of two commissioned by the Senate Committee on a bipartisan basis. Oh, so you know it's good or horrible. They are based largely on data about the Russian operations provided to the Senate by Facebook, Twitter, and other companies whose platforms were used. The second report was written by Computational Propaganda Project at Oxford University. Oxford University taking on Cambridge Analytica on that one, I guess, along with Graphica, a company that specializes in analyzing social media. The Washington Post first reported on the Oxford report Sunday. I'm sure we have that in pocket as well. The Russian influence campaign of 2016 was run by a St. Petersburg company called the Internet Research Agency. You know that. Owned by a businessman, Yevgeny Prigozhin, businessman, sure, who's a close ally of President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Duh, of course, I know, but they love to, that's how they round out sentences here. Mr. Prigozhin and a dozen of the company's employees were indicted last February as part of the investigation of Russian interference by Robert Mueller, special counsel. Both reports stress that the Internet Research Agency created social media accounts under fake names on virtually every available platform. A major goal was to support Donald Trump, first against his Republican rivals in the presidential race and then in the general election, and as president since his inauguration, during which he stole all that money. Thank you. Creating accounts designed to pass as belonging to Americans, the Internet Research Agency spread its messages not only via Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, which have drawn the most attention, but also on YouTube, Reddit, Tumblr, Pinterest, Vine, and Google+. According to other platforms. How would you like to have been assigned to the Google+ team? And that one, oh, this is so, I don't know, maybe you love it. Nobody's looking at our work. We can do whatever we want. It's fantastic. We still get paid, but I don't know. Maybe they didn't get paid as much as the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter group. Anyway, its attack on the United States used almost exclusively high-tech tools created by American companies. So, way to go, innovators. Thanks for disrupting our elections. The new knowledge researchers, and I really do, I lay a lot of the blame on at the feet of the people running those companies, although I will say it probably caught them by surprise that they're stupid little companies. I know they're worth billions of dollars, but they still think of them sometimes as stupid little companies, bent on world domination. Yes, about money, but basically they keep thinking, no one's going to, who could be opposed to our stupid little mission of making it easier for people to share happy photos with one another, right? Anyway, the new knowledge researchers discovered many examples of the Russian operators building an audience with one theme and then shifting to another, often more provocative set of messages. For instance, an Instagram account called Army of Jesus, and it's with some underscores in there, Army underscore of, you know how that was going to work. And then there's another underscore after Jesus, by the way. So I guess that's supposed to be underlining. I don't know. Anyway, the Army of Jesus account first posted on January of 2015. What were they posting? Images from the Muppet Show. Harmless enough, but people will follow it because it's called Army of Jesus. And then they'll say, well, where's the Jesus? Well, wait, we didn't get onto it. Then they shifted to The Simpsons, which also isn't Jesus. And by early 2016 became Jesus focused. Okay, so I guess that's an interesting plan. I don't know whether they had worked that out in advance or it was just random or they didn't know what to do with this thing. But if you saw an account called Army of Jesus, like my first reaction would be, I don't think I want to follow that person. That's not really where I'm at. However, if you were perhaps inclined but thought, Army of Jesus, they might be a little, edgy for me. Jesus, that's good. Army, that's not as good. I'm not interested. But if they, seemed like, well, they have a good sense of humor, the Muppets, which is not, super cutting edge in the way of humor, but okay, harmless enough. And then, The Simpsons, everybody loves The Simpsons. That's even a little edgier, right? So you might think, this isn't a humorless right-wing person who's going to, a right-wing evangelical who's going to lecture me about morality all the time. They're going to share memes that I like. And then on to the Jesus focus, which is devious, but not that far removed from what an American evangelical operation might actually do. So congratulations to the Russians for figuring that one out. Multiple memes associated Jesus with Mr. Trump's campaign and Satan, of course, with Mrs. Clinton's, when they eventually got around to the heavy stuff, I guess. The Russian campaign was the subject of Senate hearings last year and has been widely scrutinized by academic experts. The new reports largely confirm earlier findings that the campaign was designed to attack Hillary Clinton, boost Mr. Trump, and exacerbate existing divisions in American society. But the new knowledge report gives particular attention to the Russians' focus on African Americans. which is evident to anyone who examines the collection of their memes and messages. The most prolific IRA, and again, Internet Research Agency, IRA efforts on Facebook and Instagram specifically targeted Black American communities and appear to have been focused on developing Black audiences and recruiting Black Americans as assets, the report says. Using Gmail accounts with American-sounding names, the Russians recruited and sometimes paid unwitting American activists of all races to stage rallies and spread content, but there was a disproportionate pursuit of African Americans, it concludes. And that seems reminiscent. I would have thought that would have been part of the plan for a long time, even under the Soviet system, because, of course, it was pretty obvious for a lot of reasons, not the least of which was it was true, obvious around the world that African Americans, that Black citizens were treated as second-class citizens, still are in many instances. But say at the peak of the civil rights movement, that was a very open and obvious theme. It was, of course, true, and demonstrating it to the world was a key mission for civil rights leaders in the United States. And, ideological opponents of the United States of whatever stripe would be very interested in pointing up the hypocrisy of it all, especially as, America was pretty heavy-handed in using its newfound superpower status, rightly, in many cases, to advocate for the spread of democracy around the world, or to point out where authoritarianism still reigned in places around the world, and those regimes would point out in retaliation, you got plenty of disorder to settle and hypocrisy to deal with in your own house. Maybe, and I don't know what that was necessarily meant to, leave us alone until that happens, or just you're as bad, if not worse, than all the things you're accusing us of. And I think that was a fairly obvious weak point for even during the Soviet era to attack. And then I think that a lot of people probably, I don't know whether they did or didn't do this, but I think it's pretty well demonstrated that they weren't trying necessarily in the same way to influence elections directly or organize people, I don't think. But that would have been the accusation. Actually, at the time of white American conservatives, they thought all throughout the civil rights movement that civil rights leaders were in fact tools of the Russians, or being paid by or manipulated by the Russians. That was a very frequent accusation made against top civil rights leaders. And very often they may very well have been courted by, social media obviously didn't exist, but they may have been courted by the Russians to think of them as allies, although, you had to do so with a very serious grain of salt. It wasn't necessarily the case that Russians, even of the Soviet era, were particularly interested in racial equality. They simply were interested in pointing up hypocrisy in the United States and sowing discord. So in many ways, their focus and drive and goals have been the same ever since. Let me get back to the more organized thinking here in the article, though. The report says that while other distinct ethnic and religious groups were the focus of one or two Facebook pages or Instagram accounts, the Black community was targeted extensively with dozens. In some cases, Facebook ads were targeted at users who had shown interest in particular topics, including Black history, the Black Panther Party, and Malcolm X. The most popular Russian Instagram account was Blackstagram, which doesn't win that many points for originality, but that's what they called it, with 303,663 followers. The Internet Research Agency also created a dozen websites disguised as African American in origin, with names like blackmattersus.com, blacktivist.info, blacked, B-L-A-C-K-T, blacked olive, like black olive, but with a T. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. .org and blacksoul.us. Some of which, certainly in hindsight, once you found out that the Russians might be behind it, you would look at the name and say, I get what you mean there. I could see that. Whereas, I suppose if it was legit, you might say, well, okay, they might have chosen that name. I don't know why they would have gone with that, but it seems almost stereotypical that a white Russian troll looking to reach out to African Americans to choose blacksoul.us. Like I heard once during the 70s that soul would have been something many U.S. black Americans would like very much, I guess. I'm still trying to work on the old Russian accent, still spiced with Transylvanian, aren't we? But we're working on it, getting a lot of advice on that one. Thanks, guys. Okay. Anyway, on YouTube, the largest share of Russian material covered the Black Lives Matter movement and police brutality, which was actually like a thing, with channels called Don't Shoot and Black to Live. The report does not seek to explain the heavy focus on African Americans. I did that. But the Internet Research Agency's tactics echo Soviet propaganda efforts from decades ago that often highlighted racism and racial conflict in the United States, as well as recent Russian influence operations in other countries that sought to stir ethnic strife. I didn't know about that part. Renee DiResta, one of the report's authors and director of research at New Knowledge, said the Internet Research Agency leveraged pre-existing legitimate grievances, yes, wherever they could. That's exactly what any spy would do. As the election effort geared up, the Black Lives Matter movement was at the center of national attention in the United States, so the Russian operation took advantage of it, she said, and added Blue Lives Matter material when a pro-police pushback emerged. So interesting that they got you on both ends there. Very real racial tensions and feelings of alienation exist in America and have for decades, Ms. DiResta said. The IRA didn't create them, it exploits them. Yes, true, right. Of 81 Facebook pages created by the Internet Research Agency in the Senate's data, 30 targeted African American audiences, amassing 1.2 million followers, the report finds. By comparison, 25 pages targeted the political right and drew 1.4 million followers. Just 7 pages focused on the political left, drawing 689,045 followers. While the right-wing pages promoted Mr. Trump's candidacy, the left-wing pages scorned Mrs. Clinton while promoting Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. The voter suppression effort was focused particularly on Sanders supporters and African Americans, urging them to shun Mrs. Clinton in the general election and either vote for Ms. Stein or stay home. I think we know all about that. Whether such efforts had a significant effect is difficult to judge. Black voter turnout declined in 2016 for the first time in 20 years in a presidential election, but it is impossible to determine whether that was the result of the Russian campaign. I guess definitively, but it's a pretty good guess. First time in 20 years. The New Knowledge report argues that the Internet Research Agency's presence on Instagram has been underestimated and may have been as effective or more effective than its Facebook effort. The report says there were 187 million engagements on Instagram, users liking or sharing the content created in Russia, compared to 76.5 million engagements on Facebook. In 2017, as the American news media focused on the Russian operations on Facebook and Twitter, the Russian effort shifted strongly to Instagram, the report says, so I guess watch out there. The New Knowledge report criticizes social media companies for misleading the public. Regrettably, it appears that the platforms may have misrepresented or evaded in some of their statements to Congress, the report says, noting what it calls one false claim that specific population groups were not targeted by the influence operation, and another that the campaign did not seek to discourage voting. It is unclear whether these answers were the result of faulty or lacking analysis or a more deliberate evasion, the report says. The report suggests a grudging respect for the scale and creativity of Russian influence operations, But the Russians were not eager to take credit for their own efforts. After the election, the report says the Internet Research Agency put up some 70 posts on Facebook and Instagram that mocked the claims that Russia had interfered in the election. "You've lost and don't know what to do," said one such post. "Blame it on Russian hackers." Well, very clever of them to have gotten around to that. So as I said, several other versions of the same story also circulating. But I was particularly interested in Sherilyn Eifel's take on it, which I just basically got to skim the first tweet or two, but it looked like it might be an interesting insight. So why not share that one before our next break comes up? Sherilyn, by the way, the president and director counsel of LDF, the NAACP's Legal Defense and Educational Fund, the nation's premier civil rights law organization. There you have it. You know the NAACP, of course. This is why it infuriates me, she writes, when our community ignores the Russia investigation. Is that a problem? I mean, it's not one that I've taken note of, that the black community was particularly inclined to ignore the Russia investigation, although it may just be, well, a large portion of every community ignores the Russia investigation. Anyway, black voters were a key target of this misinformation and manipulation effort by Russia. Race is the most reliable source of division in American politics, which is a problem all by itself. She continues on, recruiting black Americans as assets, quoting from the New York Times piece we just read. This is like another country using COINTELPRO tactics to manipulate, divide, and influence us, but this time on Facebook. And yes, I think hitting on the right portion of the piece we read, the most prolific IRA efforts on Facebook and Instagram, specifically targeting black American communities. And I guess probably taking note of the fact that this is a call back to old-style Soviet tactics as well. More than 250,000 black people, she says, following a Russian Instagram account pretending to be a black activist. We had better wake up, and we had better demand attention to this specific issue at upcoming House oversight hearings in the new year. And I think that's actually a great idea, particularly for some of the new members of Congress, and particularly those that represent minority districts in particular. It's a great opportunity to speak up for. I mean, I guess it's a little sad that we have to have cover for saying, well, if you represent a large number of minority constituents, you should speak up for those minority constituents and their particular concerns. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what the purpose of having you there is. And we're supposed to be making room for that because this is a representative democracy. But sometimes we don't. And I don't know. Maybe, though, the fact that this is such a large, a huge and important national topic for everybody, but it's a good time to call out the fact that, there was some disproportionate targeting here. And we're not saying that it means that it was happening because you guys are racist. It's exploiting a problem of long standing that exists because you guys are racist. But here at least we get to say, we have a very special interest in this as well, but we want to help and work alongside you. And so you don't have to be so afraid of us for once. Okay. That might be a nice inroads here. So where were we here? Yes, we'd better demand attention to this specific issue at upcoming House oversight hearings in the new year, and it'll get a good reception from everybody else, at least on the Democratic side, working on those oversight hearings. And good, that'll spotlight some of our newer members who are going to be speaking up for minority populations that sometimes get shunted aside in these things. She continues with her tweet storm here. Has Senator Sanders been asked to address this directly? I hope that he will recognize that his candidacy was the focus of the operation's effort to manipulate black voters. I hope that he is committed to aggressively investigating Russia's actions and social media platforms. That is a big question, because a lot of his supporters, and I don't know how he was in particular, a lot of his supporters were among the folks who latched on very quickly to the mocking of the idea that Russians had anything to do with it. That's problematic in itself. And finally, she says, of course, the fact leadership of social media platforms evaded fully disclosing to Congress the extent to which black voters were specifically targeted and that the plan was to discourage voting. This was a voter suppression scheme, and they ought to be held to account for it if they haven't been to date. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. 10,000 directions still left to go in here, but we're going to have to skim through a couple of them and get what we can on the record and rely on the fact that we have all week. And, of course, next week will be the big Christmas to New Year's week, and I'm not certain how much of it will be here and live on the air for. So I guess at worst we can catch up with some pre-recorded shows to try to get a couple more stories on the record. But no hard and fast plans for all of that yet, and we still have to figure out exactly. I guess here at home we have to figure out where I'm going to be on which days, and also figure out the schedule of others who are working hard to make this program work for you each day of the week. And well, more to come about that. Let's see. One thing I wanted to turn to today, covered by the Daily Kos Elections folks in their Morning Digest, their headline piece. Pardon me. Morning Digest starts this way. Republican Mark Harris, remember this guy, further implicated in North Carolina election fraud scheme. I think I'll just read their summary of things rather than the original reporting. I want to kind of get through this in a coherent fashion quickly. And, well, let's see. Like I said, it's their first story here of the day from North Carolina 09. The North Carolina State Board of Elections announced Friday that their next hearing on the apparent election fraud in the 9th District would not be held until January 11th, which is, of course, several days into the new Congress. So pretty poor timing, really, in terms of their trying to figure out a way to fix this in time for the opening of the 116th Congress. This is a change from their previous self-imposed deadline of December 21st, which would, of course, be this Friday. The new Congress convenes on January 3rd, and with this delay, we know the state won't have results certified before that date, so it's extremely unlikely that the new Democratic majority would seat anyone at that point, although I think they should just go ahead and seat McCready, but apparently not a lot of support for that, and I don't know why. I mean, obviously they consider it a risky political move, even though I think it's entirely justifiable. And it concerns me that the movement over the last couple of days has been toward allowing not only a rerunning of the race, but a rerunning perhaps of the Republican primary as well. And honestly, I don't know. I think this story here in the Morning Digest argues against that a little bit. In a way, I skimmed through it. Let me tell you what I'll go on with it. Why don't I do that? And then you'll know what it says. So, it's extremely unlikely that the new Democratic majority would seat anyone on January 3rd. Both parties now expect that there will be a new election in the 9th District, which would mean the seat will just remain vacant until such an election can take place. And honestly, I don't know why anybody thinks that they would be able to administer this election any better than the last one. They would know to keep an eye on McCrae Dowless, I guess, and the absentee ballots, in particular from Bladen County, but I don't know that they don't just shift tactics and do their cheating elsewhere. It seems to me that the race was that close with cheating, then I wouldn't have very much doubt in my mind about seating the Democrat in that case. Anyhow, it's growing even less likely that Republican Mark Harris will be the district's next representative under any circumstances. Late on Thursday, the Washington Post reported that Harris had personally sought out McCrae Dowless, the operative at the center of the alleged absentee ballot fraud scheme that's the target of investigators. Even worse, the paper writes that Harris wanted to hire Dowless precisely because, are you ready for this? Because he was responsible for producing almost the same impossible absentee results for a candidate who ran against Harris in the 2016 primary. 2 years ago, Harris and the 2016 primary, let me just emphasize that again. I didn't emphasize it the first time. I'll emphasize it this one. 2 years ago, Harris and Union County Commissioner Todd Johnson both narrowly lost the nomination to Robert Pittenger during that campaign, right? And you remember now, Pittenger this time, the victim of that, except he was the victim in 2016 too, but just check this out. Anyway, the circumstances were such that regardless of the cheating, Robert Pittenger won the nomination in 2016 and then went on to win the seat. So 2 years ago, Harris was running and so was Todd Johnson. And so was Pittenger. Pittenger wins in the primary. Dowless, during that campaign, was working for Todd Johnson, who, by the way, they note here for us very helpfully, was just elected to the state Senate. So, maybe you should look into that as well. Harris was warned by his advisors on election night in 2016, the primary, that he was likely the victim of fraud after he and Pittenger received a total of 5 votes among mail-in ballots from Bladen County, the same county under intense scrutiny now, while Johnson won an astounding 221 of them. So how interesting is that? Dowless is working for Johnson in Bladen County, and the Republican primary winner gets 5 votes. Harris also gets 5 votes. 221 go to the guy who also lost, but who happens to have hired McCrae Dowless. Interesting. Harris ended up just 134 votes behind Pittenger district-wide, while Johnson finished 3rd overall. So there you have that, too. 135 votes throughout the district would have made Harris the nominee in 2016 and Pittenger, not. But instead, it's interesting because now Pittenger now sits as the aggrieved party from the 2018 primary. But where, I don't know where he was. Where was his head in 2016? Anyway, all of which basically to me spells you don't want a Republican from this district at all. Basically, as punishment for your ongoing shenanigans, that seat is awarded to the other person because the only remaining party to the election who only lost by 900 and something votes anyway, who was the victim of the Republican cheating. I guess I have to say it that way. I can't promise you that he didn't do any cheating of his own. I don't know. A year later, though, when Harris was planning to seek a rematch with Pittenger, multiple sources say he made sure to get Dowless on his team, despite warnings about the operative's criminal record and even Dowless's, quote, own public testimony describing questionable election tactics, unquote, which he divulged to the State Board of Elections in an earlier investigation in 2016. In May of this year, with Dowless now on his team, Harris defeated Pittenger in a tight primary. This time, Harris won 437 of Bladen County's 546 mail-in ballots. Pittenger's staff complained to national Republicans that he was the victim of fraud, but the state Republican and state GOP and the NRCC reportedly sat on these allegations, and the congressman eventually conceded defeat to Harris weeks later. And now, Bladen County's mail-in ballots are once again the focus of election fraud allegations, this time for the general election. Which, again, to me is like, well, I don't really want to hear from the Republicans on this one. No, there's no do-over for the Republicans. They knew that this cheating was going on in 2016. They knew it was going on in 2018. And they just thought, we'll swap one Republican for another and win the race with a little cheating. And it's no big deal. I say you're out. I say that's it. Your 2018 is over. And, we might give you a shot in 2016. Maybe. I don't know. If there's no way we can keep you off the ballot at that point. All right. Let's see. Other interesting stories to touch on in our catch-up story here. All right. Well, we'll note this one for the record without reading through the entirety of the thing, although I'm somewhat interested in the story. Just thought you should be aware of this one. New York Times reporting this one under this headline, Twist in Green Beret's Extraordinary Story, Trump's Intervention After Murder Charges. Yay, murder. Let's see what we can do to help out. Helene Cooper, Michael Tackett, and Taimur Shah on this piece from yesterday's, New York Times. The long and winding case of Major Matthew L. Goldstein, I'm guessing at the pronunciation here, had all the elements of a story that would seize President Trump's attention. It was a dumb story. A Green Beret charged by the Army in the killing of a man linked to the Taliban. Thorny questions about America's long-standing entanglement in Afghanistan, and a Fox News program that lauded the officer as a war hero. And so, on Sunday, Mr. Trump announced on Twitter that he would examine the case of Major Goldstein, it's Golsteyn, by the way, using verbatim language aired just minutes before by his favorite tally program, Fox and Friends. Quote, this is his text here, his tweet, at the request of many, because I just saw it on tally. At the request of many, I will be reviewing the case of a, and here he encloses it in quotes, U.S. military hero, unquote, Major Matt Goldstein, who is charged with murder, Mr. Trump wrote. He could face the death penalty from our own government after he admitted to killing a terrorist bomb maker while overseas. Well, you can imagine what's coming next. With that tweet, Mr. Trump made another extraordinary intervention into the American judicial system. A president who just last week threatened to stop a Justice Department effort to extradite a Chinese tech executive, we haven't gotten to that one, who spends most days vilifying the special counsel, had now stepped into a complicated legal and ethical case that goes to the heart of the fraught politics of the military's rules of engagement. So as you could probably guess, it's a rather complicated one, and the question is, at Fox and Friends, they say, oh, he killed a terrorist bomb maker. Of course, the rest of the world says, we're not so sure that this person was a terrorist bomb maker at all. In fact, that's why apparently they were out and about and available for murder. He had been brought in on suspicion of being a terrorist bomb maker, and apparently, at least temporarily, cleared of that suspicion. But I don't know what the circumstances were. I don't know enough about the story. Major Goldstein ends up with him somewhere along the line and apparently kills him. And now that Fox and Friends is talking about it, Donald Trump is on the case. So, as they say here, a president who just last week threatened to stop a Justice Department effort to extradite a Chinese tech executive and who spends most days vilifying the special counsel has now stepped into this problem as well. And I guess add that to I'm going to sue and possibly use the government to investigate Saturday Night Live as part of an official Democratic spin machine. The guy knows no boundaries. So anyway, I would like to know more about that story, but perhaps we'll explore that on another day. Just want to make you aware that one is out there. Let's see. Speaking of the Internet Research Agency and their trolling, let us throw this one into the mix. Another New York Times piece. I'm spending too much time with the New York Times, but that's the way it goes. More powerful than a Russian troll army. More powerful than a locomotive, even. More powerful than a Russian troll army. What is it? It's the National Enquirer, which is an interesting thing for the New York Times to be writing about. Jim Rutenberg wrote this piece. And I liked the New York Times tweet that went along with it. Did I put it aside here? Yeah, here it is. It's basically just kind of a twist on the subheader that they use for this piece, but I like the way they put it. The National Enquirer was built to cover Trump, right? You kind of know what sort of stories they're interested in. The New York Times, the National Enquirer, the New York Times was not built to cover Trump, clearly. National Enquirer was. And here's the quote from their piece. If it had only stuck with its original mission, digging up dirt on the rich and famous without a care for the rules of traditional journalism, it would have had the tabloid story of a lifetime. That's interesting. That's an interesting view of what they could have, should have done in all of this. But instead they went the other direction. For money. I understand it. Here's Jim Rutenberg's piece. The most powerful print publication in America might just be the National Enquirer. That's because so much of America is very dumb and they don't like real news. But okay, it is what it is. It functioned as a dirty trick shop for Donald J. Trump in 2016, which would have been the stuff of farce. The ultimate tabloid backs the ultimate tabloid candidate if it hadn't accomplished its goal. The Enquirer's power was fueled by its covers. For the better part of the campaign season, Enquirer front pages blared sensational headlines about Mr. Trump's rivals from eye-level racks at supermarket checkout lanes across America. This stroke of genius distribution apparatus was dreamed up by the man who made the Enquirer the nation's biggest gossip rag, its previous owner, Generoso Pope Jr. The Enquirer's racks under the current chief, David J. Pecker, were given over to the Trump campaign. This was a political gift even more valuable than the $150,000 that the Enquirer paid in a catch-and-kill deal with the former Playboy model Karen McDougal for her story of an affair with Mr. Trump. Wondering what the Enquirer's covers were worth to the Trump campaign, I called Regis Mayer, a co-founder of Do It Outdoors. Haha, that's funny. The National Mobile and Digital Billboard Company. He said a campaign with that level of national prominence would cost $2.5 million to $3 million a month. It's such a powerful placement, Mr. Mayer said. Everybody's got to go to the grocery store. Well, not everybody. I mean, we all have to eat, of course, and get food, but not everybody has the luxury, of course, of going to the grocery store. However, another story, another day. With the news last week that the Enquirer had admitted to federal prosecutors that it made the catch-and-kill payment to influence the election, it's worth stepping back and appreciating the unlikely role played by the supermarket tabloid and its parent company, American Media Incorporated, in electing the 45th president of the United States. Now that the federal prosecutors have cleared away some of the fog that shrouded the 2016 campaign, it's easy to see that the Enquirer was more than just a publication that puffed up Mr. Trump while going after his rivals. It was the real-world embodiment of the fantasy online world of trolls, Russian and domestic, who polluted the political discourse. From its perches at Publix and Safeway, I don't know why they get chosen, it was often doing the same job as Alex Jones of the conspiracy site InfoWars and the more strident Trump campaign surrogates on Twitter and Facebook. The Enquirer spread false stories about Hillary Clinton, illnesses concealed, child prostitution, bribery, treason. Each cover trumpeting these tales was arguably more powerful than a tweet from an account with millions of followers. It's a shame it went this route because the Enquirer was built to cover Mr. Trump's wild ride. That is to say, emphasis, was built to cover Mr. Trump's wild ride. If it had only stuck with its original mission, digging up dirt on the rich and famous without a care for the rules of traditional journalism, it could have had the tabloid story of a lifetime. Instead, it refused to unlock its vault of Trump tips and stories as it promoted him as America's savior. Actually, make that the world's. As one Inquirer report in early 2016 had it, from, quote, a source close to Donald, unquote, even President Vladimir Putin of Russia wanted him to win the White House. Wow, it was in the Inquirer, and he kept denying it. It was like a double whammy. Jennifer Palmieri, Mrs. Clinton's campaign communications director, told me they could have been covering all of Trump's misdeeds. But instead, not only were they not reporting on that, they were a pipeline from darknet conspiracy theories to grocery store lines. With its online cohorts, American Media Incorporated helped build a distortion machine that so polluted election news cycles that, for its more receptive audiences, Mrs. Clinton not only deserved to lose the White House, she deserved time in the big house. Before making her its main target, the machine chewed up Senator Ted Cruz. It ran unsubstantiated allegations of extramarital affairs against him at a time when he was proving himself Mr. Trump's most stubborn Republican challenger. The only person quoted by name in the affairs piece was Roger J. Stone, Jr., a longtime advisor to Mr. Trump, you know him, who was quoted as saying, where there's smoke, there's fire, who now doesn't believe that, of course. Mr. Stone, who communicated with top campaign officials throughout the election, is under investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller, of course. One passage in the Cruz story caught my eye, citing a report in Radar Online, a gossip outlet also owned by AMI. I did not know that. The Inquirer claimed that, quote, an individual purporting to be a representative of the hacker group Anonymous posted a disturbing Twitter video that threatens to expose, quote, very dirty secrets, unquote, including information about Ted, quote, visiting prostitutes, unquote. That would have been interesting information. Here's an odd thing. Radar attributed the provenance of this supposed Anonymous video to an obscure Twitter handle with only a few thousand followers that has since gone dormant. A review of the account's activity found tweets and retweets of anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant messages relating to Europe, as well as a critique of the United States policy on Libya, linked to a video from RT, the Russian state-financed cable network. It makes you wonder if the inquiring mind of Mr. Mueller would like to know more about the Inquirer than he has let on. Federal prosecutors in New York have led the investigation of AMI, though. Once Mr. Cruz was out of the way, two people familiar with AMI's operation told me the company pulled up files on the Clintons that it had collected over decades, some 24 cardboard boxes filled with promising material. AMI began a painstaking effort to sort through the old clips and tips concerning pay-for-play deals, rumors of affairs, and Vince Foster conspiracy theories. But as the campaign wore on, the Inquirer's covers favored stories similar to those coursing through InfoWars, Russian trolldom, and, increasingly, your uncle's Facebook feed. According to one headline, Hillary was, quote, corrupt, racist, criminal. In another, she was, quote, eating herself to death. The Inquirer also reported, make that, quote, reported, that she had suffered 3 strokes, had liver damage from booze, and was prone to violent rages. A couple of weeks before Election Day, as Russian bots pushed a narrative into Facebook of a Clinton body count, an Inquirer cover line screamed, Hillary Hitman tells all. The false narratives built to a frenzy that included an appearance by the AMI Chief Content Officer Dylan Howard on InfoWars, and a cover promising that Mrs. Clinton and her aide Huma Abedin were, quote, going to jail for, another quote, treason, influence peddling, bribery. Inside, where the unsubstantiated claims that Mrs. Clinton had, quote, covered up a child sex scandal, which echoed the Pizzagate conspiracy, and that her relationship with Ms. Abedin had, quote, lesbian undercurrents. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. For those who were seeing the same bilge online, the Inquirer's headlines and stories may have increased their doubts about the Democratic nominee. For those seeing such stuff for the first time, right next to the gum and candy, the false coverage may have been revelatory. Placement on nationwide checkout lines was perhaps Mr. Pecker's greatest gift to Mr. Trump, and it's something that he inherited from Mr. Pope. Watching his circulation plateau as his readers moved to the suburbs in the 1960s, Mr. Pope struck a deal with major grocery chains. He would build new racks to put magazines at eye level near the cash registers, arguing that more sales for him meant more profits for them too. It gave us complete exposure, saturation, whatever you want to call it, his son Paul David Pope told me on Friday. It is a brilliant plan, I must say. As the younger Mr. Pope's history in the family business, The Deeds of My Fathers, shows, the Inquirer was known to pull off an occasional catch-and-kill deal in the old days, including one involving Senator Edward Kennedy in a bid for access to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. But the tabloid usually raises hackles not because the stories it published were false, but because of its methods. It was a publication so hungry for celebrity dope that it sneaked a reporter, disguised as a priest, into Bing Crosby's funeral. Ugh. I am sure my father's intention with his media empire was not to be used after his passing as an outlet for fake news. I'm not so sure about that. The younger Mr. Pope said. Well, I have my doubts about that one, but okay. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting take on things and a good reminder of what AMI is doing in the investigation, not just about the catch and kill, but about their in-kind contributions to the Trump campaign. All right, let's see. Not much time for that much else, of course. Time almost to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Here's a simple little thing we might be able to sneak in before we run out of time. Just thought this was interesting. Andrew Kaczynski found this one. While people are debating if the president can be indicted, the Washington Post notes that President Grant, yes, got arrested. He did, for speeding, which was a major feat because, of course, it was all horse-drawn carriages back then. And he actually got booked and posted bail and everything. And the Washington Post pulled up the story out of the archives and shared it with everyone. Thanks to Michael Rosenwald for writing it up. Amid President Trump's mounting legal problems, TV talking heads and barstool philosophers from Boise to Britain, I love the alliteration. Why those two? I don't know. Have been pondering one of the great mysteries of the U.S. Constitution. Can the President of the United States actually be indicted, arrested, handcuffed, the whole deal? Possible? The prevailing answer is this. Nobody is sure, but that's not entirely true. President Ulysses S. Grant knew. Anyway, in 1872, while president, Grant was arrested at the corner of 13th and M Streets in Washington. This was not a high crime, but it was, at least theoretically speaking, a misdemeanor. The man who led the North to victory in the Civil War was busted for speeding in his horse-drawn carriage. I didn't even know that was an infraction. It was possible. But the more you think about it, of course, the more it makes sense. Or the more you read this. Anyway, the story of his arrest, confirmed a few years ago by Kathy Lanier, who was then the district's police chief, was told in a remarkable but obviously forgotten story in the September 27th, 1908 edition of the Washington Evening Star under the headline, "Only Policeman Who Ever Arrested a President." That policeman was William H. West, a black man who had fought in the Civil War. It's a fun twist. Since his retirement, the story said, he has decided to let the public know the true story of the arrest. It begins with Grant's love of fast horses. General Grant was an ardent admirer of a good horse and loved nothing better than to sit behind a pair of spirited animals, the Star story said. He was a good driver and sometimes let them out, that is in quotes, to try their mettle. I guess that makes more sense to horse people than anybody else. Anyhow, and that's where Grant, as president, rode into the law. The police had been receiving complaints of speeding carriages. After a mother and child were run over and badly injured, see, there's reasons, Officer West was dispatched to investigate. As West spoke to witnesses, another group of speeding carriages headed toward him, including one driven by the President of the United States. Well, it is very interesting. I probably could get it all in there, but then we wouldn't be able to pay attention to what's coming up next. You should take a look at it. Suffice to say, he didn't arrest him on the spot on that one. He gave him a warning and then found him the next day doing the exact same thing. I'd arrest him too, but how do you like that? He actually arrested him, told him, this is it, I gotta take you in, the law's the law. He didn't show up for court. And other people who were arrested that same day had to, so no resolution about whether or not he can be indicted and tried and imprisoned, but an interesting historical footnote nonetheless. Anyway, time now to hand things over to Justice for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what he's got on tap here. Facebook does not care about facts. Did you know that? And their fact-checker rebellion proves it. Ooh, I got another one about that for later in the week. The pathetic NRA deserves more ridicule for being so easily suckered by the Russians. I agree. Let's do that. And Russia is moving troops into new barracks on a series of disputed islands near Japan. Uh-oh, how are we going to settle that one? What about this? How about this one? The Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court renounced the GOP on Friday.
From Daily Kos Radio.
Changed her registration.
Radio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
I did hear about this one. So Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court renounced the GOP on Friday for their continuing and enthusiastic embrace of attempted rapist Brett Kavanaugh. Wasn't expecting that one. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that his government was looking for a way out of a multi-billion-dollar arms deal with Saudi Arabia. Smart guys.